Check 1, 2, 3.
Hello, hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Why is that Cam?
Nope.
I guess we'd never know.
Can you hear me okay?
We
Yes,
can hear you, Stuart.
We just can't see you.
Yeah, I don't see it. Hold on. Oh,
Be like maybe three little dots.
There we go.
Da-da-da. And yes, I created an event today, Cam.
I believe you.
This is going to be a really cool show. Dr. Stuart has written a really cool book.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Got some amazing research. And how much time do we have?
We got 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Did I tell you, Jackie, how much I really dig that background? That's so cool.
My desks.
Well, just your background. I think that's
Yeah, you got a great background. You should talk about it more. I'm just
Yeah.
I think we do, don't we?
A little bit. Yeah. I think maybe he's saying we talk about it too much, Todd.
No. I'm just kidding. I'm talking about your actual background. You know,
Oh,
like
okay.
I'm making a pun. It didn't go over very well at all.
Oh, wow.
That just
I get it now.
that's a fail.
No. Gotta have fun at work, right?
How's my makeup look? Did I get it right?
You
No.
missed a spot right there.
Yeah, I was just going to say you missed a few spots.
Oh, back in the days when we did radio and you could do it in your pajamas.
Well, you still can do it in your pajamas.
Yeah.
No one's judging you.
You can have pajama bottoms on right now. We wouldn't even know it.
How do you know it?
That's right.
You could be naked, but just have
That's
a green
right.
screen.
You could be in high heels.
You'll never know. From here up.
All right.
Did you already Facebook Live it, Cam?
I'm just setting it up right now, so I try not to do it too early because Facebook is timing out more and more these days. Okay, I need to clear the data again. So we got to start it over again.
Yeah, just give me a heads up because then I think Jackie and I both do a watch party on our personal websites.
Yeah, I'm just as soon as you see it streaming on Facebook, it'll be there. All right, stand by. Welcome to Life Mastery with Todd Allen, the talk radio show that dives into the science of higher consciousness. Join Todd and his guests weekly at 10 a.m. Pacific Time and learn how to live a peaceful life with intentional mastery. Enjoy a survey of inspiring topics such as abundance, intention, health, manifestation, love, and transformation. It's all right here, leading authors, speakers, coaches, entrepreneurs with stories and messages to support your well-being, let alone your most evocative dreams.
Hey, it's another groovy day, and there are a couple of reasons it's that way. First of all, when I got up this morning, I decided it was going to be a groovy day, and it pretty much lasts all day. Doesn't mean that everything is all groovy, but at least I start out that way. And it is Life Mastery Radio Day. Yay! One of my most favorite days of the week. I get to connect with my good friend Jackie, and we bring you some of the best guests, I think. Don't you think, Jackie?
Totally.
We have some best guests.
Everybody's just been so amazing and given such great information.
And, we like to bring you great thoughts and ideas for you to use on your very own life mastery journey. And we have a very inspiring guest today. I was totally blown away. Of course, I say that a lot, but I was totally blown away. With his book and the power it has, and it's something I believe deeply in. So we're going to get into that. But first, let's just take a minute. We're going to be talking about mindfulness today. And, I always like to start the show with a little mindfulness practice and just kind of get in the groove a little bit more and connect with you and connect with spirit. So let's start out by just reaching way up high. Just reach, stretch, maybe roll that back a little and those shoulders, and really reach out to that which gives you power and what you rely on to give you sustenance. And that could be God, it could be anything, it could be Allah, it could be anything that you believe in that gives you the power. Just plug into that for a minute and let's take in a deep breath. And let that breath out with just a big ah. And just let that flow right up from your solar plexus, through your heart center, through your speaker box, and right out. And just let the universe know that you are here and you're connected to it. And you're willing to accept all the opportunities that it brings your way. That was a mouthful, huh? Let's do that one more time. Another big this time, visions and goals just flow right up through those same places, out into the universe, and allow the universe, spirit, God, Allah, whatever it is that you believe, the opportunity to make those come true for you. There we go. How was that, Jackie? Did I change it up a little bit? I think
that was good. A little bit, yeah.
As always, I have my co-host with me today, Jackie Bailey. And Jackie, look at that backdrop. That is so cool.
It's my classroom.
That's her classroom. So give us a little bit of update. Man, I see a lot of activity on Facebook, and now you really started out with the younger adults, little people, little humans.
Yes, little humans.
And now you've stepped up. You're offering a class for the bigger people.
Yes. Well, I've done that before. And so I'm doing it again, but we are this week, we're finishing our first 8-week course here at the studio.
8 weeks already?
I know, it's crazy. And so we've got 3 classes finishing up this week, and we'll have another class that finishes up in a couple other weeks. And then we're starting new classes on November 18th. That week, we'll be starting new classes with whole new groups of kids and having a debate workshop all day on half a day on a Saturday in November. And then we're starting some adult workshops in January, a 5-week series of workshops. So lots of things happening at the studio. And this Saturday, I'm actually having an open house. So anyone that's in the Redmond or Seattle, Washington area wants to come by between 1 and 3 and see my studio and check things out, you're welcome to do so.
The Puget Sound area. Come and check out Jackie's public speaking studio. It's so cool. I don't think anybody else is doing this, are they? Have you been looking at your competition?
I don't have a lot of competition. Yeah. And a lot of people might be doing it like I was doing it first of all, that I was going to different places and teaching a class here or teaching a class there and renting a space and advertising around that space. And I was driving everywhere to give these classes. And it's nice to now be in generally one place.
A central location.
Central location that's my own space, and I can make adjustments whenever I need to. I can schedule anything whenever I want to. I don't have to check in with anybody.
Except your students,
really,
right?
Except my students. That makes it really nice.
I'm curious. We're talking about mindfulness today, and our guest is so patient right there. But we kind of like banter around a little bit before the show, and I'm really curious. Does that come into play in some of your instruction, or is that something that you have on your radar coming up? Maybe. What
is that? What are you asking me?
Mindfulness.
Mindfulness.
Yeah. Do you take that part into account at all?
I haven't. I work so hard on getting my students to just recognize and look outside of themselves, when they're conversing with people or when they're presenting information, to not make it all about them.
Right.
But mindfulness hasn't necessarily entered in yet. I'm teaching them to reach out more than hold things in at this point.
Right. And to discover they're in. So I'd have to guess, and maybe we could ask our guest today, I'd have to speculate. I know for me, it helps me to get inside of me and understand what's important to me and kind of let that flow through me and out of me.
Well, in my own preparation, yes, I believe that mindfulness has helped me to get some clarity, to set my energy right before I teach a class, so
Right.
that even if it's at the end of the day and I'm exhausted, I have a little bit more to give, and I can meditate a little bit before that, get myself centered a little bit more, and that definitely does help me as an instructor.
Right. Right. There is so much going on these days, and we're going to get into that here in just a minute. I want to remind our listeners that today's show page is at www.likemasterradio.net or .com. And you can find any links that we talk about on that page today. We have a link up there for our guest. And then a little bit later on this afternoon, Jackie will create a blog post that highlights what we talked about on the show today. It will go up on our YouTube. Go check out our YouTube channel. All of our shows are up there. If you're looking for something that's interesting to listen to, all of our shows are interesting, and we have some really great guests. And Jackie and I, would really appreciate it if you told a friend, right? We don't have telephones anymore. We have telephones.
That's right.
Tell a friend. Tell a friend about Life
Tell a follower.
That's funny too. We have a great newsletter that goes out. You can sign up for that newsletter at the website. My book is there. I would really appreciate it if you love my book. My book is a great way to get started in understanding some of the life mastery principles and some great tools for you to use on your very own life mastery journey. Jackie Bailey can be found at it's right there on the sign. I need a sign.
JackieBaileySpeaks.com.
He's got that down pat too. Look at that finger go. That's cool. I just have one more last curious question for you, Jackie, and that's anything going on online? Can people expect some online courses soon? Or?
Yes, it's a little bit beyond my control sometimes to find people that want to do that outside of my own area. But if anyone's listening would like to have an online class, it could be happening from wherever you are in the world. In fact, I have students in China and Australia already. And so if you would like to have an online class anywhere, we'll set something up. In fact, I'm focusing right now on getting to go to the Caribbean and do some summer camps this upcoming summer, and like to do some online classes with those students prior to that.
I think you're pretty open to being a private coach too, right?
Of course, absolutely. Yeah. And I do that as well.
Be, if you're a professional or somebody and you've been asked to speak and you need a little bit of coaching, call JackieBaileySpeaks.com.
Thank you. And those seniors in high school getting ready to go to college, many times colleges now are requiring or suggesting that you have a personal essay written or a video that talks a little bit about who you are and what you want to accomplish at their university. And I can help you with that as well. Craft your message so that you tell your unique story and your experience and impress those people that are looking at your application. So lots of things we can do together.
I'm speaking to about 400 high school students this Thursday. I'm so excited.
Yeah, that's exciting.
I know. And I want to inspire them. And more news at 11 on that. Okay. You ready for the show? I think we told them sign up for the newsletter, read my book, check out Jackie's website. We're ready to go.
Yep, let's do it.
Our guest today is Stuart Eisendrath, MD, and he is a professor of clinical psychiatry, I'll slow down, emeritus at the University of California, San Francisco. He has treated a full range of depressive disorders from mild to the most severe over the past 40 years using multiple modalities. Dr. Eisendrath's lectures on mindful-based cognitive therapy, that's MBCT for short, for the University of California TV have been viewed over 1.5 million times. He was one of the early adopters of MBCT, that's mindful-based cognitive therapy, and rapidly began developing it as a modality for individuals currently in episodes of depression. Dr. Eisendrath is the founding director of the University of California, San Francisco Depression Center. He recently wrote a book, and that book was just released on October 1st, and it is called When Antidepressants Aren't Enough: harnessing the power of mindfulness to alleviate depression. And we've been graced with the privilege to call him Stuart. So Stuart, welcome to the show today, my friend. How are you?
Good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You know, before the show, we kind of got together a little bit, and I just want to share it with the listeners. You know, many times I'm asked, where do I learn about meditation? What's something I said? There's many modalities, but I always recommended the book Getting in the Gap by Wayne Dyer. I think that was the one book that had the greatest influence on me. I've recommended it to many people, but I found a new book. Maybe you could hold up the copy of that book, Stuart, and just let us see it. I found a new book to recommend, and this is it. This is a really cool book. Oh, it's upside down.
There you go.
There we go. This book takes you through some step-by-step practices. It kind of describes what depression's all about and what it's not, and the effects it has on people. And I am so blessed to have you on the show today, sir. How are you today?
Good. Thank you.
You know, I think that there are a whole lot of different things going on in our society today that are leading people to depression. So, well, first of all, let's start out. How did you get started in this understanding, and what brought you to being an expert in this area?
Well, as a psychiatrist, I was always involved in treating depression. Depression is really the number one psychiatric disorder in the world.
Wow.
And, you know, and on any given day, the World Health Organization states that 300 million people are depressed, and almost everybody knows somebody who's been depressed or they've been depressed themselves. And so it's something that is an important thing to be able to treat as a psychiatrist. And about 25 years ago, I got started in learning about mindfulness, and I found it really very helpful for myself in dealing with stress and a personal experience of depression. So it was very useful in diminishing stress, and I got progressively more into it, going to different meditation teaching centers and meditation retreats. And when mindfulness-based cognitive therapy started to be developed in the late 1990s and early 2000s, I hopped on that train as soon as possible and started to bring it back to our institution.
Right. Well, let's define a couple things. Let's define depression, really. So, you know, you have some great descriptions in your book, but maybe the listeners would gain some great insight as to what is it and what's going on in a person's mind. And I guess everybody's susceptible to this if they let their thoughts go there.
Well, that's a good point. Depression is, according to the formal diagnosis, consists of at least 5 symptoms like loss of appetite or excess appetite, loss of weight, sleep disturbance, either increased or decreased sleep, depressed mood, suicidal thoughts, loss of energy, lack of ability to enjoy things. Those are all sort of the traditional symptoms of depression. And if you have 5 of those going on for 2 weeks or more, we regard that as depression. But an important thing that's not part of it is really what you alluded to, is in that depression not only has those features, but it generates negative thoughts. And negative thoughts in turn generate more depression. So there's
Right.
a cycle that goes on in which the person continues to think negatively, and those negative thoughts are just as much a symptom of depression as loss of weight is. So it's important to recognize those thoughts as being symptoms of depression.
Fascinating. And everybody's susceptible, right? This is not like a genetic predisposition. I'm sure some people are predisposed, but anybody can experience or have this experience of depression.
Well, yes, that's true. Anybody can. It is an interplay between environment and genetics. Some people have certain genetic makeup that makes them more susceptible to stress producing depression, and some people have a genetic makeup that makes them more resilient to stress and less likely to experience depression. But given enough stress, almost anybody can develop depression.
Everybody's got a breaking point, huh?
Pretty much.
Wow.
And so I really loved your description. I've heard it before in the book. Depression is kind of hanging out in the past, right? Anxiety is really another form of depression. It's probably its opposite. And that's dwelling on things that are going in the future. Did I get that right?
Yes. I like to think of depression and anxiety as being disorders of time. The person who has depression tends to be focused on the past and feel as if they have experienced a loss of a loved one, a loss of a job, a loss of some financial status, some type of loss. They feel, whether it's actually occurred or not, they feel as if they have had a loss. Whereas the person with anxiety thinks a loss is going to take place in the future,
Right.
that some disaster is going to happen, that they're going to have a catastrophe. So depression is focused on the past and anxiety is focused on the future. And that's where mindfulness comes in, because if you can focus on the present moment, you don't have the bandwidth available to focus on the past or the future.
Right. You know, I've heard it explained to me too, and maybe you can, what's the word I'm looking for, Jackie? Maybe you can
expound on it.
Yeah. But our mind is a magical thing. And when we have these thoughts of depression, thinking about things in the past, or anxiety, thinking about things in the future, like take, for instance, there's a dude in the closet with a knife, right? Or something to that. Or there's a boogeyman under my bed that's going to get me. Parts of the mind don't know that that's not true. And so then that creates stress and all kinds of physiological things going on in the body that would be like if it were really happening.
Yes, the way it tends to work is our more primitive parts of the brain, areas like the amygdala, are involved with warning. So if you feel certain stimuli, like you hear the door rustle and you start to get sort of worried, is there somebody in the closet, as you said, or is there something going on? That sends signals to the rest of the brain, be on high alert. Now, normally there are parts of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, for example, that tend to regulate the emotions that get generated from areas like the amygdala. So you don't get completely out of whack when something occurs. You're able to tone it down. In depression and anxiety, those areas tend to be disturbed, so that the prefrontal cortex is actually hypoactive, it's diminished, and the amygdala area is hyperactive, it's increased. So the person is kind of the victim of those primitive parts of the brain.
So that's a really good description of what's actually happening physiologically in the body in people with depression or anxiety then, right?
Yes, and in fact, we've shown that in studies of the brain with functional MRI. That's an MRI that takes pictures of the brain's blood flow second by second, and it shows what's being hyperactive or hypoactive. And we see those patterns that I just described, where the prefrontal cortex is diminished in blood flow in depression, and the amygdala is increased.
So what's been the traditional treatment then for people with depression or anxiety?
The most traditional treatments have been, in fact, no treatment.
Take a pill.
Well, not even that. Most people with depression don't even get treatment. They don't seek treatment because they feel things are hopeless, or they go to their doctor, but it doesn't get recognized. So many people with depression don't get a specific treatment. But for those who do get a treatment, most of the treatment in the United States, at least, is with their primary care physician. And the most common treatment there is antidepressant treatment.
And what does that do physiologically to counteract what's happening in your body?
Well, when it works, it tends to normalize those areas of dysfunction in the brain, restoring the prefrontal cortex back to normal and diminishing the warning area, the amygdala, and other parts of the brain as well as the amygdala. But I'm just using that as an example.
So in your book, I think you stated that there's a 50-50 chance. So if a person goes to their primary physician and gets diagnosed and gets some kind of antidepressant therapy, is what I think you called, there's a 50-50 chance. Is that right?
Well, if somebody goes to their doctor and gets an antidepressant, after 12 full weeks of treatment, there's a 30% chance that they will have a complete recovery.
Wow.
If they get a second antidepressant trial to try to help them further, there's a 20% chance. So that means after 2 full trials, 24 weeks, that 50% of people are recovered, but 50% aren't recovered. They're still suffering. And that's why we really developed this program, to try to help people who hadn't fully recovered or recovered at all, and give them another option besides trying a third or fourth medication.
Well, no wonder, though, that you get more depressed, because if you're feeling like you're already depressed, you go seek medical attention, and that doesn't help you. Wouldn't that lead to more hopeless thoughts that I'm never going to be able to get out of this? I'm never going to be able to heal from this. And that's probably part of the problem, right?
That is part of the problem, that a person could easily feel that way. It isn't actually true. And that's why that is a depressive thought. It's understandable how it would occur, but there are ways of helping those people. And it's a matter of finding another technique. And that can be mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. It could be adding psychotherapy to the package. It could even be electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, which has been around a long time, but is still very effective. So there are a lot of different treatments available, and you have to overcome the person feeling depressed about continuing to feel depressed.
Right. I'm really curious, Stuart, obviously there's long-term effects, but I have an understanding that the brain is like this plastic thing that is ever evolving and dynamic. So a person with long-term depression, are there physiological changes actually in the brain, or is this all kind of a thought process?
There's usually actual physiological changes in the brain, abnormal patterns. We used to call it a chemical imbalance theory, but we've really moved beyond that.
Right.
We look at the systems of the brain and find out there is dysfunction in those systems of the brain. And antidepressants can help restore the normal functioning, but actually so can mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. And that's one of the most important things about this, is that the mindfulness training isn't smoke and mirrors.
Right.
It really changes how your brain functions. People in our course and in our research who on the average had suffered depression for 7 years were able to make definite changes in 8 weeks in how their brain functioned.
Yeah. See, I've been in treatment for alcoholism 3 times. And it wasn't until I read a Reader's Digest article about the effects that the 12-step program, which I think is a mindfulness practice, that the 12-step program had shown to actually create physiological changes in the mind of those that are working, or not in the mind, but in the brain. And that pretty much anchored the deal. And I can think back now, that's what sealed the deal for me, is to know that a 12-step practice, a mindfulness practice, actually created a physiological change in my brain for the better.
Yes, that's true. We used to think that the brain was a static organ, but now we know it is plastic. It can change quite dramatically in different ways with different activities and with different skills that a person learns.
Right.
Well, in your book, Stuart, there's one line that I thought was very powerful to me, and that was that thoughts are not facts.
Right. I saw that too.
And
That's
so,
important.
yeah, it sounds like it, because it sounds like our thoughts are what really controls our emotions in most of these cases with depression and anxiety, right? And so if we can learn to control those thoughts, we can heal ourselves, or at least alleviate some of our symptoms. So what does it look like to become mindful? What is that? How would you define that? Is it just meditation, or are there other steps to getting to the point where you can actually alleviate those symptoms in yourself?
Well, you have a two-part question there. One is
Jackie.
that thoughts are not facts, and that's a fundamental issue, that most people have the mistaken assumption that their thoughts are facts. And if you're depressed, you're having depressive thoughts. And if you believe those thoughts, it's natural to get depressed. If you believe a thought like, I'm no good, or I'm a failure, or I'll never be as good as my neighbor, or I'll never be successful, if you believe those things, it's natural you would get more depressed. So those thoughts can be very powerful in producing depression. And then if you're depressed, you generate more negative thoughts. So in mindfulness, we help you step back from those thoughts. It's kind of like this. Let me give an example. If you're in a town walking down a street, and the street has a lot of storefronts on it, and the storefronts are negative thoughts, contain negative thoughts, and you go into each store and you buy that thought and make it your own, well, then you're going to end up pretty depressed.
Right.
But with mindfulness, you walk down that street and you see the negative thoughts, but you don't go in the store and buy them. You see they're just thoughts. And that's what we do with our minds. We become a powerful observer of, oh, I'm having the thought. So instead, when you say something like, I'm a bad person, we help the individual rephrase that to, I'm having the thought I'm a bad person.
Right.
And once you start to make that separation and decenter from that thought, you start to become free.
That was huge for me. That was a huge, I was taught to pay attention to what I was paying attention to. And I think that's what you're describing is becoming an observer. And then, Stuart, I can remember exactly where I was, what I was doing. It was many years ago when I figured out that I could choose my thoughts. That was a huge revelation for me. It seems like a simple thought and idea, but many times we go through our day and this thing is just cranking and we really don't have control of it, or we don't have cognitive control, or we just let it go. Is that kind of what you're describing?
Yes, our minds are popcorn poppers of thought. We have over 1,000 of them a day, and some people think we have many times that. So you're generating a lot of thoughts, and that can be good or bad. I mean, one woman in a class that we ran kept thinking to herself, I'm so fat, I'm so fat. And she actually didn't appear to be fat, but she was, as she says, I'm carrying on a public relations campaign against myself throughout the day.
Yeah.
And so you could see how that would be depressing. And once she started to realize that, she started to be able to have some distance from it and notice, there I go again, there I go again, and start to be able to decenter from those thoughts and make a dramatic change in whether or not she believed them. Part of this got started for me. I'm a product of the 60s and 70s, And I was involved in a student demonstration back in the Vietnam era, and I saw this event take place where the police charged a building and started hitting the protesters on the head and elsewhere. And the next day, it was reported that the students had charged the police,
Yeah.
started hitting them. And I had seen the thing, and it was the first time in my life, I was, young at that point, and that I realized the paper doesn't always tell you the truth. And that's the same thing with our minds. Our minds generate these thoughts, and it doesn't always tell us the actual fact of the matter. It generates a lot of things with distortions in it. And if we can observe that, we're so much better off.
I just want to take a minute really quickly. And if you've just tuned in, our guest today is Dr. Stuart Eisendrath, and he is the author of When Antidepressants Aren't Enough.
Show your book, Stuart. Put it up there.
Harnessing the power of mindfulness
there you
to
go.
alleviate depression. And Dr. Stuart is the founding director of the University of California, San Francisco Depression Center. And you are listening to Life Mastery Radio with Todd Allen and Jackie, and you can go to our website and find a direct link to Dr. Stuart Eisendrath's website and a plethora of useful information, and certainly the link to his book. So before that, Stuart, we've kind of been talking about the solution and the MCDT. Did I get that right? Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. Yay, my brain's working.
I think you mixed up the B and the C, though. I think it's MBCT. I think you said MCBT. I think.
Leave it to Jackie Bailey to get it. She is the queen of acronyms. I know it for a fact. But this therapy now has proven to be like the cure. And traditionally in the past, I just love the description you had in your book of like a psychiatrist trying to figure out a patient shows up and he's got an arrow in his chest. Oh, I think that's a Buddhist story. And the patient's like, well, where did it come from? Who shot me? And why is this happening? And it's not so much about that. It's about why is it there and how do we get it out?
Yes. In depression, unfortunately, people tend to get more depressed about being depressed. So it's like if you're depressed, you start to say, well, I'm a bad person because I'm depressed, or I'm a weak person. And sometimes they hear that from people around them as well.
Yeah.
So
that's got to play a huge part.
Those negative comments from others or from yourself tend to deepen the depression. And what we try to do is help the person lessen those kinds of statements and really say, okay, I have depression. It's like alcoholism. I have a condition that I need to treat, but it's not something that I have to be ashamed of or makes me a bad person. It means I have an illness and I need to treat it. But I want to correct one thing that you said. We don't actually cure depression.
Right.
Depression tends to be a chronic illness and often recurs. And so it isn't cure like, if you have a strep throat and you take penicillin, it's cured, it's gone. You're not going to get it again unless you get another episode of it, but that's not that common. So you can talk about cure. In this form, we talk about you're going to still get negative thoughts. You don't wipe out negative thoughts. They're going to keep popping up. But what we're talking about is changing your relationship to those thoughts.
Right.
So instead of being a victim of those thoughts or buying those thoughts, you can say, okay, it's like a radio. I'm going to turn down the volume on those thoughts. They're still there, but I don't have to pay attention to them. I don't have to have my life be controlled by them.
So how do you do that, though? Can you give us an example? Because I'm ruled by my thoughts. I will tell you, I don't think I'm depressed. I'm certainly not depressed, but I'm certainly ruled by my thoughts. And I know that sometimes I undermine my own success because of the thoughts that are in my head. So what do you do? How do you teach people to change a negative thought to something more positive? Is there something you can share with us in that regard?
Well, changing a negative thought to something more positive is actually what happens in traditional cognitive behavior therapy. And what we do is somewhat different. We change the relationship to that thought. I'll give you an example. Say you're doing a meditation, and maybe a very brief meditation for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, where you're focusing on your breath. Well, what happens? Well, your mind wanders. That's what minds do. And they're going to wander to things like, well, what am I having for dinner tonight? I'm getting kind of hungry. Or what do I have planned for tomorrow? Or maybe I should have said something different to the person I was in that argument with. Or why am I so fat? Or a number of different things that range from pretty benign to pretty negative.
Have you been in my head, Dr. Stuart?
Pardon me?
Have you been in my head?
Well, that's a good point. We can touch on that too. But when you're meditating, you know, being mindful is this. Mindfulness is being aware of what you're experiencing as you experience it. So if you're meditating on your breath and your mind wanders to, let's say, what am I going to have for dinner? You let that thought go and gently and kindly escort your mind's attention back to the breath. Then your mind wanders again, and you bring your attention back. It may happen 100 times during a 5-minute meditation. Many people, when they start off, they think my mind is wandering. That means I'm failing. And that's far from true.
Right.
All minds wander, even the most experienced meditators. So you gradually get to learn that when your mind wanders, particularly in depression, to a negative thought, you don't have to hang on to it. You can let it go and bring the focus of attention back to whatever you're meditating on, like your breath.
Yeah, like I said, it really helped me to understand or to pay attention to what I was paying attention to. And I really love that you said focus on your breath, because a lot of meditation teachers say that when you're focused on your breath, the mind tends to wander less.
Yes, it's still a wander, but you can learn to focus it, just as other skills.
That's another important part is this is a practice, and this is a practice like riding a bicycle, and the more you do it, the better you get at it.
Exactly. It is a practice. And that's what we teach people, to learn this skill set. And that's why it's so empowering for people, because when they learn it, they can take it with them wherever they go.
Right.
We teach, for example, a 3-minute breathing space that people can do anywhere. They can do it on a bus. They can do it in a waiting terminal while they're getting ready to take a plane. They can do it anywhere and bring themselves back into the present moment and be free of those wandering thoughts.
In your book, Stuart, you provide some wonderful tools. You have these little sections or segments of your book where you title it "Try This," and you walk through some different ways to meditate and to check in on your breathing and so forth. And you use some really powerful metaphors in teaching that. One of them you've already mentioned, which is the storefront as thoughts. You've also got a suggestion in there about leaves floating down a river and just watching those leaves float. And they all look the same, but they can all represent different thoughts that you're having. And those thoughts can just drift right away, right on down the river. And
bye-bye.
So yeah. And you also had another metaphor was with clouds, just imagining clouds in the sky changing shape as your thoughts, and then they just float on by. And so I found those to be very helpful, especially for a newbie like me, who's still really learning how to have more purposeful mindfulness. And those have been really helpful to me. So if there's anyone listening who hasn't yet picked up Dr. Eisendrath's book, there's some tools in there that are really something you can put into practice right away and learn from and get better at. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. How did you come up with those? Is that something that you've learned in your studies or research, or are those your own creation?
Well, it's a mixture. I mean, those have been developed over probably 15 years of what tends to work well for people. And the thing about this is it's an individual thing. Some people like a particular
Right.
model, and some people like a different model. And it's really, there's no right way. It's what works for you. So if you find this metaphor really helpful, somebody else may not, but they may like something else. So
Right.
it's whatever works for you. Nobody can say this is the right one and that's it. You have to try them out. I like to think of it as a buffet table. You try them out and pick what works for you.
Right. So maybe we should talk about that a little bit, because you've been involved with this for quite some time now and have seen direct results and are aware of studies. And what are some of the successes, and what can a person expect? So if they pick up your book and they start to put in this practice, how soon is it before they see results?
Well, usually it takes a few weeks to start seeing results. Some people see it after 1 week,
Right.
but usually after a few weeks, they really start to get the concepts. And by 8 weeks, they're pretty well along the way. And they'll have developed the skills necessary to be able to use these techniques wherever they are.
So the results, you've experienced many. Maybe you could give us a testimonial of a person with a dramatic turnaround.
Well, there's many. I mean, for example, one fellow, and this relates to Jackie's earlier question, one fellow at the end of 8 weeks said, well, I guess if I can forgive myself for my mind wandering, I can forgive myself for other things. So people who finish our program tend to have less depression, less anxiety, less rumination, and more self-compassion and more mindfulness. So those are the main findings from our research. That's what tends to happen. And having more self-compassion is a big thing.
Yeah.
Because people who are depressed tend to have a lot of self-criticism. That's very common. That's part of the symptom complex of depression. I'm a bad person. I'm a failure. I'm not as good as others. One woman in a group that we ran said, I can't meditate. In the first meditation that we did, she said, I can't meditate as well as other people in the group. Well, how did she know that? But that's the typical kind of self-criticism that somebody in depression has.
Yeah.
As we explored it, that's a thought. That's not a fact.
Yeah. I've heard it said, if we talk to our best friend the way we talk to ourselves, we probably wouldn't have a best friend anymore.
Yeah.
And Stuart, you mentioned the word rumination, which you use a lot in your book. And it was an interesting realization for me, because to ruminate has been a word I actually introduced to my students as a vocabulary word, which is to consider things or to ponder. And how do you use it in your therapy? Because you've used it several times. It's almost like a very particular word choice, rumination. Define what that means as we're talking about depression or anxiety.
Well, rumination, as I'm using it, is really a specific thing. It's different than pondering. Pondering may be, thinking about options. Rumination, as I talk about it, is really brooding over things. So it's like, oh, I should have said this to my boss, or I should have said this to my spouse, or I should have said this to the person I had the argument with, or why did I make this life choice? It's so terrible. If I had only chosen something else, I'd be so much farther ahead. And the person goes over and over those things in a continuous loop. And in contrast to something like pondering or problem solving thinking, rumination doesn't lead to any solution. It just is a cycle of negative thoughts. And that is an important driver of depression. The more ruminative you are, the more depression. And you can even, you can try an experiment and just ruminate about something negative from your past for a few minutes and see how you feel afterward.
Right.
Do you feel better or do you feel worse?
Fascinating.
Most likely you're going to feel worse.
Yeah, you actually start to adopt and believe it.
Yeah. Interesting. Now, you mentioned that mindfulness-based cognitive therapy can help to alleviate symptoms of the depression someone is currently dealing with. But you also said that it's quite common to deal with depression on and off in different phases of our life. So when we're good at this, when we get good practice with the mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, does that also perhaps keep us from going back into those deeper depressive states once again?
Well, yes.
Relapsing?
That's a good question, because depression tends to be a recurrent illness. So if you have one episode of depression, it's likely in the next 10 years, you'll have another episode. And if you have 2 episodes of depression, there's a 90% chance you're going to have another episode within 3 years. So it tends to be very recurrent. Now, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy was originally developed as a relapse prevention program. And it's been very well studied for that. So in one study, they took a group of people who had recovered completely and taught half of them mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and the other half got treatment as usual. And the people who got mindfulness-based cognitive therapy had twice as good a chance of staying free of depression as the other group.
Wow.
In an even more important study, with a very large group of people, they compared 2 groups. They were both depression-free at the time the study started from antidepressants. And in one group, the people continued antidepressant treatment throughout the next 2 years.
Taking a pill, right? That's what.
Taking a pill, which is probably the most common approach to preventing relapse. The other group got mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and were tapered off of their antidepressant.
Yeah.
And it turned out that the mindfulness-based cognitive therapy group was actually slightly better in terms of preventing relapse. Statistically, they were equal, but in other words, it was just as good to have the mindfulness training as it was to continue antidepressants. So it was a very powerful demonstration of the effectiveness of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, especially useful for a person who doesn't want to stay on medications for one reason.
Totally. Well, and I'd have to wonder, they probably didn't look into that. I'd have to think that quality of life would be a huge factor in being better for those with cognitive mind therapy versus those that are popping a pill every day.
Well, you don't have all the side effects of the medication that
right.
Sometimes get weight gain or sexual difficulties or other side effects. So there's advantages in not being on medication. But for some people, I'm not anti-medication.
Right. No, I get it.
Can be very life-saving, and it may be important for them to stay on it. But this is another choice that people have.
Nice.
Oh my goodness, we only have about 5 minutes left. Stuart, is there anything that we missed? Is there a last parting message you would have for our listeners? You have an awesome book. I highly encourage people to get Dr. Stuart. If you know somebody, even if you don't know somebody and you really want to get into mindfulness practice, I think this would be a great book. It's got great explanations. You know, I almost think, Stuart, that maybe a different name, or you could republish this book with a different name so that it applied to everybody. I think.
That you hit on a good point. Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy is really what we call a transdiagnostic tool. It works for a lot of things. It's in my earlier book called Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy, Innovative Applications, that was aimed more at researchers and clinicians than this book is. Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy was effective for PTSD, for insomnia, for ADHD, for migraine headaches, for cancer. So the techniques of teaching people to focus their attention, become more self-compassionate, be able to view themselves with some distance and perspective, really help a lot of people, and not just people with depression. So
well, let me ask you this. I know we talked about it during the pre-show. That Congressman Tim Ryan, I think it's is he from Minnesota? Wisconsin. I think it's Wisconsin. He wrote a book on meditation, and he claimed in the book that if a lot more people got into mindfulness, that a huge part of our healthcare concerns as a society throughout the United States would fall to the wayside. Do you buy into that theory?
Well, I think it would change things dramatically,
both
in healthcare and in our general population. And, mindfulness is now being spread to school settings and teaching children to become more mindful. It has a lot of potential applications and can be very useful in a variety of settings.
Right. Yeah. I totally believe it. It made a huge difference in my life. And if that was the one thing that I did, it turned me around completely. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And it's so simple. Maybe we could reiterate that fact. It's just a simple practice.
It's very simple, but it requires practice, as you say. It's kind of like the analogy of, if you have a glass that's filled with dirty water, it's hard to see through it. But if you can sit still and let that dirt settle out of it, you can all of a sudden start to see clearly.
So is it a large time commitment then, or can you just do this a few minutes each day?
You can really do it a few minutes each day. Nobody knows what the exact dose is that is best for everybody. But many people practice 3 minutes a day. And in my books, there's some brief meditations like that. Some people prefer a longer practice. It really depends, again, on what you like to do.
And what works for you.
And
there are, we could reiterate, there are a multitude of modalities, and the thing to do is just explore and try and see what works for you. But I will say this, it will work for you if you try it. So try it, you'll like it. Mikey likes it, try it.
He likes everything.
Mikey likes everything. Hates everything.
He hates everything.
But Mikey likes mindful practice. Thank you so much, Dr. Stuart, for being on the show today. I think I always say it, there's a lot more we could talk about, but I think we hit on the top of the topics of this amazing research that you've been a part of, and a really cool book. So I highly recommend everybody get the book. Check it out for yourself. If nothing else, just become mindful. It's a great practice, and I think it will make a huge difference in the way you show up in the world. Thanks for tuning in. Our website, www.lifemasteryradio.net. This video will be up in YouTube very soon, so tell a friend. And lastly, please make it a great day, because it is all about choice. And choose to be mindful. Bye-bye for now.
Bye. Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you for tuning in to Life Mastery.